Tuatahi tēnei mihi atu ana kia koutou, ko tāmai nei ki tēnei hui a hiko me ki. Nau mai haere mai ki tēnei momo wānanga, ki te taha o tēnei o ngā uri o ngai tahu, ko Dr. Lily Fraser tēnei. Tukuna atu i tōna wā hei tautoko, hei aki, hei poipoi, i ngā whakaaro i roto i te ao o te kai tōtika, anō hoki i roto i te whakaaro mo te oranga tangata. So nau mai haere mai everybody, welcome to our Toi Ako webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lily Fraser, who has kindly given up her time to share a bit of her kaupapa with us today. Kia mohi o mai koutou. This webinar is going to be recorded so that if you do have trouble during the webinar, you'll be able to access everything that's going on at a later point. If you do have any pātai or any questions, you'll see it either at the top or the bottom of your Zoom. There's a Q&A section. So if you could please pātai, i o koutou pātai, ask your questions to Lily. She will do her best to answer them. And if we can't get to all of the questions before the end of the webinar, we'll look at some documentation in terms of getting out some additional kōrero from Lily. But that's enough from me. That's enough from us at Toi Tangata. Last but not least, we just would like to put the disclaimer out there that the views and opinions expressed in our webinars are those of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Toi Tangata. Engari, we have had, we've been approached by multiple rōpū and whānau across Aotearoa who have wanted to see a little bit more about what Lily has been up to. Nō reira, e te tuahine, e mihi atu ana kia koe. I'll get out over here and let you roll in with your kaupapa. Tēnā koutou.
Tēnā koutou, i ngā whānau e noho mai nā, i o koutou kāinga, i o koutou wāhi mahi. Tēnei te tuku mihi atu kia koutou, hui anō kia koutou o Toi Ako. Tēnei rā, kei te mihi atu, i te mutunga te rā, ko te kaupapa, ko te oranga o te tangata o te whānau hoki. Nō reira, nei rā te mihi atu kia koutou, e hui mai nei, aha koa, rorohi konei. He uri ahau no Naitahu, no Otākau, no Puketeraki, ki Otepoti, engari i tipu ake au ki Tāmaki Makaurau, ki raro te maru o te marae o Hoani Wai ki te marae. Ngari tēnei wā ka te noho ki te tonga kai te mahi o ki Mangere. So a big mahi to all of you watching at home. I would just like to mihi to the supporters of this kaupapa, to Toi Tangata, Toi Ako. And first of all, I'll tell you a bit about myself and then we'll move into our kaupapa. Before I start, I'd just like to send a mihi aroha, mihi tautoko atu ki te whānau o Ihu Mātau. Rātau e whawhai ana, e noho rangi Māori ana i runga i te kaupapa o tō rātau mana motuhake e tō rātau whenua. Nō reira, e kore mutu ngā mihi kia koutou, e tūkahana i tēnei rā. So I am from Dunedin, from Naitahu, and I was born at my marae Otākau, but moved up to Auckland at the beginning of the Kohanga Reo movement in the early 80s. And so my mother, having seen the loss of reo in our own marae and our own whānau down south, chose to put myself and my brother through Māori education, through Kohanga Reo, and then bilingual classes, right through to Te Wharekura o Hoani Wai Te Marae. And so my whole education was through a Māori medium, and just due to my age, I'm the first graduate of Kura Kaupapa Māori to become a doctor. We were the second graduating class from Hoani Wai Te Marae, and I'm happy to say that there are others following in my footsteps, and you know, the number of Māori doctors is increasing. At the moment, I work at Turuki Healthcare in Mangere. We are a Māori provider. We have a clinic in Panmure as well, and we also have a satellite clinic at Ruapo Takamarae in Glenanis. in another clinic in Epsom, at Epsom Lodge, which is run by the Salvation Army. So if you are out there looking for a Māori provider, just put our little plug in. No mo hara mai. But today I'm here to talk to you about kai. Just having a look at going through this presentation, I'd like to mihi to Joseph Finau and Marian Funaki, who are both people that have really led the way and supported me in this kaupapa. So I will be talking about them and their health and their journey with low carb in this kōrero today. Often we co-present, but today it's just me by myself. So I will start off. And so this journey starts with Joseph. So this is Joseph Finau. He's when I first met him, he was in his mid-30s. He was at the third time that I met him, his wife was terminally ill. And at the time that I started working with him for his diabetes, she had recently passed. And so he was now a solo dad to 6 children. 2 of whom have severe autism, so definitely a big mahi for him. And as you can see by his photos at this time, he was morbidly obese, and he had very severe, recently diagnosed diabetes. And he knew that if he could lose weight, and if he could lose weight, his diabetes would go away. And so he was a man on a mission to achieve that. And so when I first met him, I was still practicing the standard way of nutrition. So we talked a lot about low fat, we talked about portion control, we talked about cutting out sugar, which I think everybody agrees that that's a good idea. And we worked, I prescribed him a lot of medication. So this was Joseph's medication for the first year of him having been diagnosed with diabetes. You can see he was on a lot of medication. He injected himself with insulin. He had a CPAP machine to help keep his airway open when he slept. And he was really, he worked really hard to do everything that we as his health team suggested. And so at the end of 1 year, his HbA1c had come down from 130 something, it was down to 50 something. And as doctors, that's our goal, is to get the HbA1c, which is a marker of diabetes, down to around that 50 level. And that's a bit light. And so I was really excited for him. He had worked really hard to change his diet. He had been exercising. He'd been doing everything that we had suggested. And I felt like he had achieved what we had set out to do. He, on the other hand, wasn't so impressed. So even though his diabetes was now looking really good on numbers, it was actually the same weight as when he started. So despite all his exercise, despite the massive change in his diet, so he'd gone from drinking litres of sweet drinks a day down to water only. He'd really changed the way that he ate and followed what we call the diabetic plate model, and he was exercising. Despite all that, he hadn't lost any weight. And now here he was, still a young man, a young father, dependent on medication and dependent on a machine to sleep. And for him, his future wasn't looking that great. And so he really pushed me to think about what I was doing, because he knew that if he could lose weight, things would be better for him and his diabetes would potentially be cured. So he was asking me, Lily, why haven't I lost weight? And to me, it wasn't, like we've studied the science at medical school. It wasn't too hard to understand, because when we start prescribing insulin to people, they do gain weight. And so Joseph had been injecting himself with insulin. And so if you're trying to reverse that process and you're trying to reduce your insulin, you've got to look at what are your medications and then what is your kai. What is it in your food that is pushing the insulin high? And the answer to that is your carbohydrates. So carbohydrates get broken down. That's things like potato, kumara, pasta, rice, taro, but also all the sugary things and the grains. So anything with sugar added to it, anything with wheat, cereal, all those things are carbohydrates. And those all make your insulin rise. And when your insulin is high, you store fat. So knowing that, because they said to me, which vegetables shall I eat? And I was like, well, apart from the starchy vegetables, the vegetables aren't really the problem. The problem is the wheat bix that you're having for breakfast, the bread that you're having with your sandwich, the potato or whatever you're having with your dinner. Those are the things that are really keeping this going. So I said to him, how about, and this was without knowing anything about low carb, but just understanding the science, how about you stop those carbohydrates and just really focus on your protein? So at that stage I said, your meat and your vegetables that grow above the ground. In fact, I said just your green vegetables because, like I said, it was all kind of just an idea to me. And so away he went. These are some of the meals that Joseph eats. So he has run a Facebook page and he shares what he eats. And so you can see some really delicious kai here. You can see fish, which is the protein. You can see eggs, which are protein. Vegetables that grow above the ground. Little bit of carrot there, but it's about the amount. It's not that these foods are bad. It's what can your body process. Curry without the rice. Roast meats without the potato. Boil up without the doughboys or the bread. So, for some people a really big change, but still, to me, it's the most delicious part of the kai that you get to keep. So the results were really phenomenal. Within 3 weeks, he had come off his insulin because now that he had taken the carbohydrates out of his diet, his blood sugars had come down and he didn't need the insulin to cover them anymore. I didn't see him for about 3 or 4 months, and when he came back, I barely recognized him because he had very quickly lost 30 kgs, and his total weight loss has been around 50 kgs. And he's been able to maintain around that level since then. His cholesterol has improved significantly. So when we look at cholesterol, it's not just one number. There are lots of numbers that are, there's 4 main numbers that we look at, or 3 particularly. And so the triglycerides are the ones that really are a marker of how well you are processing your sugar and your carbohydrates. So if your triglycerides are high, you are not processing your sugar and carbohydrates well, it'll go up. As the triglycerides go up, the HDL will come down. So they're just like a seesaw. We want that HDL to be as high as possible. And because his triglycerides were so high, at the beginning we couldn't even read his LDL, but you can see that his LDL is okay. His blood pressure was high, and so he's managed to get back to a normal blood pressure. So these ones on the right in September are actually with no medication. So he managed to come off all his medication. He lost enough weight that he doesn't need his CPAP to breathe anymore. So that's that Epworth Sleepiness Scale. And he had kidney damage at the time when he was first diagnosed in 2013, and that's reflected by the protein leaking in his mummy, and that had also come back down almost to normal. So he'd made really good progress over the 5 years with this change in eating. So, okay, so mummy is urine. I don't know if there are any questions. No, it doesn't seem to be. Okay, so this is Joseph now, diabetes free. He has been a really strong advocate in our community in Mangere, but also in South Auckland. This image is taken from Humans of South Auckland Facebook page. They did a big kind of photo series in the Manukau Mall, and he was part of that. He's been, a real role model for people looking at how they can regain control of their health. Other things that Joseph has done for us, he has provided cooking classes, both in the community and in our clinic. He's presented on whānau living. He's been a guest on whānau living with Stacey Morrison, talking about this way of eating and demonstrating some recipes with her. And he's also collaborated with the Auckland University of Technology, AUT, Human Potential Centre, which is fronted by Grant Schofield, who's a professor there, and looks at ways that making nutrition and activity changes can enhance your health. And so he has supported us and them developing our own resources that are relevant for our people. So I will be talking about the science of this a bit later, but my next, case person, lady that I'm going to be talking about is Marian Funaki. And so Marian Funaki is actually my friend's mother. So her son and I went to medical school together, and she came on board to help us out once she had started this way of eating back she started in 2017. And she lives in Otahuhu with her whānau. Her husband is Tongan, and she's from up north, from Kaikohe. And she calls herself the original big girl. You know, she was overweight as a child. She was the eldest granddaughter or grandchild, and she feels that her whānau, just their way of showing her their aroha, was to feed her. And she has been obese her whole life. And so she is recently turned 60. So she started this not long before her 60th birthday. And her motivation was she has very severe osteoarthritis of her hips, so severe that she can't stand without a walker or with her crutches, and her hips are fused right into the joint. And so she needs to have hip surgery. And to do that, she's always been too big to undergo the surgery. And so she had a weight that she needed to get down to, and she had tried lots of things. So back in the early 2000s, she'd been kind of one of the first cohort to get a gastric bypass surgery, and she had the surgery. And what that does is it limits the amount of food you can eat. So what people often, because it's not dealing with any of the biochemical issues, she just found that what her way to deal with that was to eat small meals constantly through the day because she was always hungry. And so over the next 3 years from her surgery, she managed to get back up to close to her start weight, which was over 200 kgs. So she really was trying her hardest and doing everything she could find out to do this. She says she's tried every diet under the sun except Jenny Craig because it was too expensive, but otherwise, you name it, she's tried it. And at the time that she changed to being low carb or ketogenic, she had been vegan. So this is Marianne now. In 2019. So you can see she's half the woman she used to be. So her start weight was up over 170, and now she is under 90 kgs. And so she is now about to have her hip surgery. She's at a weight that it's safe for her to have the anesthetic, and you know, for her, that's a huge change in her life. She has been really restricted by her mobility. She has her first mokopuna now, and she wants to be able to play with him and to be able to carry him and walk him around and look after him independently. And at the moment, she would struggle to do that. So Maryanne's motivation was about whānau as well, and about her being alive for her whānau. It was about mobility. And for Maryanne, her whānau came on this journey with her. So her son also took up this way of eating with his whānau. Her husband and her daughter all eat this way as well. And Maryanne is a phenomenal cook, and she is a phenomenal baker. And so she comes along and supports our low carb support group, teaching us new recipes, new tricks, because, you know, if you've been cooking a certain way for a certain length of time, over 50 years, you know, you've got the skills there, and it's just applying them in a different way. Just to look at me briefly. So I think I have quite a typical story where, as I became an adult, you know, I gained some weight as a teenager, and then as I became an adult, my weight would just increase by 1 or 2 kgs each year, and it was a gradual increase over time. And then I had my first child, and over that time I would have gained some weight and probably gained 7 or 8 over that at the end of that. And so I got to a point where my BMI was now actually in the obese range. I didn't feel obese. I could still fit size 14 clothes. And to me, that was good enough, because it meant I could still buy my clothes in the usual sized clothes outlet shops. And so it wasn't a huge burden to me, but I was aware that I had been gradually, you know, gaining this weight. The thing that really made me decide to change, and this is what we talk a lot with people, is what is the thing that's going to make you want to do this long term? Because anybody can do this short term and you will get results most of the time, but actually if you go back to eating the way you used to eat, you'll just go back to the way you were. And so for me, as I was doing my research about this way of eating, I started hearing things about dementia and Alzheimer's being a type of insulin resistance, which I'll talk about in a minute, or a diabetes of the brain. And Alzheimer's is strong in my family. My grandmother had it, my great-grandmother had it. And I think, you know, for anybody, that's a scary thought, the thought of losing your memory and not being yourself anymore. And so I kind of thought to myself, well, if there's a chance that I can change the way I eat, and that my brain can have a different kind of fuel, i.e. fat as its main fuel, then I'm going to give it a go. And so that was my bigger picture. That was the thing that keeps me in it for the long game. That's the thing that made me start. And so I have lost weight, and to me that was a happy bonus, but actually the other benefits have been much more, I guess, rewarding in terms of energy, mental clarity, not getting that 3 o'clock slump in the afternoon anymore, and the idea that my brain is now learning to use a different fuel. That might mean, and these are still early studies, that it might mean that I don't get memory problems. So I want to take a step back and kind of like look at how did we get here, and how have we ended up with this kind of food pyramid, because I think when I went through my medical training, this is the education I got. I never questioned the validity of it. I assumed that the information I was being taught was evidence-based and was the right thing to do. And so I guess when you look at this food pyramid that has all these grains at the base, and then your fruit and vegetables, and then your meat and your fat, and the sugar at the top, you look at that and you think, yeah, that looks like a good diet. And definitely when you look at it compared to this one on the left, which is what some of our whānau are eating. So very processed, highly fried, high sugar kai, and you recommend that somebody moves to that middle pyramid, you are going to feel good about that, because we can all look at that and go, yeah, that's a better diet. But is it actually the best diet, or is it best practice? And so then, you know, to make that decision, you need to actually start looking at what is the kai made of, what happens to the food when it gets into your blood. And so when we look at the kai that is in this pyramid, what we see is that whole base is made up of carbohydrates, and carbohydrates are just chains of glucose, okay? And sugar is glucose. It's glucose and fructose, but it's still glucose, and that's a really important pathway in having this high insulin. And so what we see is that actually the whole base of our pyramid is the same as sugar, or has a similar effect to sugar. So what we do in low carb, high fat, and I'll talk about the semantics of low carb, high fat versus ketogenic in a minute, but what we see is that when we take out those carbohydrates, this is what's left in our pyramid. Okay, so we are keeping the protein, the fat, we're keeping the vegetables that grow above the ground, and we are minimizing, you know, the other sweet foods that we have in our life at the moment. So in terms of, just for semantics, low carb is under 100 grams of carbohydrate a day, and each food will have a carbohydrate value. Like a banana is about 30, a couple of pieces of bread are 20 to 30, an apple is about 20. So you can see that there are different values depending what the kai is. So low carb is under 100 grams per day. Ketogenic is usually around under 30 a day. And so it's encompassed in that low carb. How do you know what you need to do? So what I usually say is that everybody is on a spectrum, okay? And at one end of the spectrum, we have insulin sensitive people. So they will eat carbohydrates and they will process them well, and it won't spike their blood sugar and it won't spike their insulin. And they will be able to switch between glucose as their fuel, which comes from the carbs, and fat as their fuel. They just switch back and forth, and it's a well working system. Right through to insulin resistant, where at the severe end you have severe diabetes. And everyone is on that spectrum somewhere. And in adult population, it's estimated that anywhere from half to 2/3 of adults sit at this insulin resistant half, this end, somewhere along there. And so they are having difficulties with how they process their carbohydrates. So this is not a one size fits all. We'll talk about that. How do you individualize this? Do you even need to do it? I'm not going to say that it is the best way or the only way, but when you are insulin resistant, it makes sense. When you're insulin resistant. So that kind of brings in this diagram here, and it looks at all the different kind of non-communicable diseases that we have. So the diseases that aren't infectious diseases that come on gradually and result in poor health over time. And so you can see here we've got weight gain, we've got pre-diabetes, we've got high blood pressure, some types of cancer, dementia, cholesterol problems, type 2 diabetes, polycystic ovaries, fatty liver, okay? So what I've learned as I've done my learning around this is these are all the same problem. And so when you go down to the root cause, what we're looking at is that insulin resistance is the problem that results in higher insulin levels when you eat carbohydrates. High insulin blocks fat being burned. So it promotes you to store your kai, including your carbs, as fat. So, and it locks it in there so you can't get it out again until the insulin level comes down. So what we talk about is that if we can lower the insulin, then we can burn fat again. We can lose weight. Things come back into the right way that they should be working. And so how do we lower insulin? We do it through lowering our carbohydrates and our sugar intake. that's a really simple explanation. There are other things that can put our glucose up, particularly stress. And so weight and these chronic diseases are not just about kai, but kai is a really important part of it. So when we look at different diets, and I'm not here to, like I said, say that this is the only option, because we do hear kōrero from other people saying, well, my cousin went vegan and he lost 30 kgs or his diabetes went away, and I definitely support that. And so this is about deciding what works for you. And so when we look at the first row here with the low carbohydrate diet, so this is a study where they put people into 4 different diets, is that what we can see is the green are the people that lost weight. The orange are the people that didn't really lose enough weight or gain enough weight to be statistically significant. And then the pink are the people that gained weight eating this way. All right, so you can see that there are people that benefited from eating this way, people that didn't necessarily benefit from it, and people that actually there was a harmful effect because they had the opposite desired impact. The zone and the learn diets are variations of the Mediterranean diet. And so we can see for those two, there's less in the green zone, but there are people in the green zone, and there are people that have lost weight eating those ways. And so for me to say that you're not going to is actually not true, because we can see that there, that they also lost weight. But more people gained weight, particularly in that zone 1. And then the low fat, this is actually a plant-based diet at the bottom. Same thing, we can see that there are people that really benefited from that way of eating, and there are people that didn't, and there are people that gained weight. And so when we look at them, there isn't a massive difference between these 4 diets, but the low carb diet does come out with the most that lose weight. And so I think it is just about thinking, well, what are you trying to achieve? What is your personal situation? What kind of kai do you like? And then giving it a go. This study, I think, is really important because people often say to me, well, if I start eating more fat, and am I now going to get a heart attack? Okay, and that's something that I was worried about. So I made these recommendations with Joseph, and then they were really positive. And so then I needed to go and look at the evidence and feel comfortable that I wasn't going to create harm by changing the way that people ate. And so particularly around the fat, I was worried about heart attacks. And so what I did was I started, I met Grant Schofield and I bought his book, What the Fat, and I looked at the evidence that he had reviewed. I started watching low carb conferences on YouTube. I started reading articles, and I was really quite stunned, I guess, at the amount of evidence that was available in support of this way of eating. And so this study here was done in 2007, and it separated people into 2 diets. So one diet was a low-fat diet. So you can see it's got 24% of the calories coming from fat, 56% of the calories coming from carbohydrate. And then a low-carb diet where 59% of the calories are coming from fat and only 12% are coming from carbohydrate. So basically flipping those 2 around. And they've both got the same number of calories, so 1,500 calories per day. And then they measured people's blood tests. This first one here looks at things like people's weight loss. So you can see for both diets, people lost weight because it's actually a low-calorie diet as well. So the light blue is the low carb and the darker blue is the low fat. And you can see that although both lost weight, the amount of weight lost by the people in the low carb was more, about double. You looked at abdominal fat, and we're really interested in the fat around your tummy because that's the fat that reflects what's going on in your organs. because being overweight is not the only way that, you know, we probably all know a skinny person that's had a heart attack, and that's because the fat is actually in the organs, it's not under the skin. So you can be skinny, we call it thin on the outside, fat on the inside, and that is more dangerous because, you know, your organs are getting filled with fat. So the abdominal fat, you can see they both went down, but they went down double the rate for the low carb. Triglycerides, so that was that one in the cholesterol panel that I was talking about, that is a reflection of your how you process your carbohydrates. So as you lose weight, that's going to improve, but it improved a lot more that in the low carb one. You can see for the HDL that eating a low fat diet had no impact on HDL, and that's what I used to believe. I used to think that patients would come in and their HDL would be low and they go, what shall I do about my HDL? And I'd be like, yeah, I don't really know. Like, there's no clear way to increase your HDL. Maybe try having some nuts and some avocados. But, you know, there wasn't really an easy way to do it. There's no medication for it, but it's definitely protective in terms of reducing your chance of having a heart attack. But you can see that once you take the carbohydrates out of your diet, then your HDL actually goes up. And I've definitely seen that in patients that their HDL might have been low or low normal, and as they've started changing the way they eat, their HDL has gone up. And that's because they go in a seesaw. These other ones are, you can see the LDL here. So interestingly, the LDL is the one that we call the bad cholesterol. But the people that ate low carb, so they had a lot more fat, but they ate low carb, actually had a reduction in the LDL in this study, and the low fat group had a rise in their LDL. Now, in other studies, we've seen that for LDL, it can either stay the same, it can go down, or it can go up. And what I've learned is that I'm much more interested now in the triglycerides and the HDL as a marker of your insulin resistance and how you're processing your CHI than I am for the LDL. Because if you're processing your fat well, then your LDL will be healthy. Insulin, which is what we want the insulin to go down so that we can burn our fat. That went down. HOMA is also a marker of insulin. But this last one here is really interesting, because if we look at that past one here where the low fat group were eating 24% fat, whereas the low carb group were having 59% fat, but the amount of fatty acids in the blood goes down when you eat low carb. And so even though you're eating more fat, the amount of fat in your blood goes down. And the reason that it does that is because when you're using, your body will always burn the carbs first. So if you eat fat and carbs together, the carbs will be burnt first because we don't want them to get high, and then the fat will be dealt with after that. And so when you switch that about and you take the carbs out, then when you eat fat, you use it up straight away because it's your fuel and you're really good at using it. And so that's why it's efficient. There's a part right here. Okay, so I've got a partai here from Brittany. Kia ora, Brittany. Can I ask why there is such a focus on weight loss when there is so much research showing that BMI only weakly predicts longevity and that obesity is only associated with increased risk for many diseases rather than causative? There appears to be a lot of stigma used as the basis for your promotion of low carb. Ngā mihi. Kia ora, Brittany. I'll answer that. Does that work? Yeah, so I totally call that kōrero. Definitely there is research happening at the moment looking at, you know, the way that I see fat is under the skin is actually that fat is, if you are storing your excess fuel in your fat, you're actually sparing it from your organ damage. But the idea that fat is just a benign kind of benign storage facility for fat, for excess fuel, is actually not true. And so the fat cells do produce their own chemicals that do have an impact and cause inflammation in the body. And so I still think that it is important to talk about it, but definitely what this slide is demonstrating is that it's actually about what's happening on the inside. And so one part of this you can see is the fat loss, but the other markers are also significantly improving. So the next slide, I might have to click back. Looks at some of those other inflammatory markers. And so what we see, these are interleukins, tumor necrosis factor, different inflammatory markers that are present in the body. And so in the low carb diet, you can see that those inflammatory markers will reduce, and they reduce by quite significant amounts, whereas in the low fat diet, they actually increased. All right, so what we do here at Turuki is first of all, I had a discussion with all our staff. They had seen me lose weight, they had seen Joseph's results improve and him seeing him lose weight, and they were starting to get interested. I had patients coming in and saying, "Hey doc, wow, you're looking great. I want to do what you're doing." And so even though that wasn't my intention, it is an external thing, you know, around the weight loss that people do notice. And so it started conversations. And so after I felt comfortable with the things that I had been learning, we sat down and we had a kōrero about it, about how we would feel about this being the way of eating that we recommend in clinic. And obviously we respect that people will always do what's right for them at that time. And so if somebody prefers to be vegan or prefers to continue with their current diet, we will work with them where they are, but that when we are giving nutritional advice, this is what we're going to be doing. And so we worked with AUT and we worked with Joseph and our support group that we developed to come up with resources to really try and make this kai relevant to our whānau in Mangere. And so the message is pretty simple. And so it's really just education around carbohydrates and what they are, and then removing or substituting for it. So for example, if say for example you're having this burger and you identify that the bread is the carbohydrate, then you take the carbohydrate off. So you take the bread off the burger and then you look at what's left. And so if you're left with, you know, the egg and the meat and the lettuce and then is that okay for you do you feel comfortable eating that, or do you need to put something else on your plate to make it a more satisfying kai? And so that's a lot of the education. How low you need to go is really personal. And so for some people, they can keep their rewa, their potatoes, they can keep their kumara and still be in that, or keep some fruit, and they'll still be in that low carb, under 100 grams level and get the results that they need. And other people need to go down to that lower level. And so we don't prescribe it in a certain way. We say you need to try it and see how it goes and see how you feel, and are you getting whatever result you're trying to achieve. So that's the first part. People get quite confused because we say high fat, and so high fat is a little bit of a misnomer, particularly if you do have weight to lose, because the fat that you get for your daily calorie requirements. So everybody has a metabolic rate that they have. So, you know, you might be that you're this tall and you're this whatever, and you need 2,500 calories a day. Okay. And so when we say low carb, high fat, your protein requirement is always going to be the same. So the amount of fish or chicken or eggs or whatever your meat, that doesn't change. So this isn't a high protein diet, and that's been a criticism from some people. This is the same amount of protein that's recommended. It's based on your body weight. We do the kind of palm size thing. And then the fat is enough fat to make you feel full, because actually what we want you to do is we want you to use the fat from your body if you've got weight to lose. If you don't have weight to lose, then you're going to need more fat to actually maintain your metabolic rate. So it's not something that you calculate, it's something you feel. And if you feel that when you eat your kai, you have good energy, you're a good, you're not freezing cold and tired all the time, which shows that your metabolics drop down, then you are getting enough. So that's that. And then the last one is only eat if you're hungry. And so that's a really simple message, because what happens is once you start changing from being a carb burner to being a fat burner, you have, even if you're skinny, you have fat in your fat cells that will provide you with energy through the day. And so the really interesting thing that happens when people change to eating low carb is that they stop being hungry. And so what we say is, if you're not hungry, don't eat. Your body is happy, and you can just eat when you're hungry. And so I don't have any hard and fast rules about it, but definitely intermittent fasting becomes part of this way of eating for most people, and it happens naturally. So I don't say to them, don't eat until this time, or you must finish your kai before this time, because actually they need to listen to their body, and their body will tell them. And you become really good at being in tune with that. So I've just got some other pātai. So kia ora, Sandy. So kia ora, Lily. Thank you for your kōrero so far. What is your whakaaro on the adopted practice of parawa Māori? An easy, cheap way to whāngai manuhiri, but is it really manaki? Is there an LCHF parawa option? So kia ora for that, Sandy. So what I kind of have I think you do what you can, right? And so for some marae where there isn't a big budget, and that is their way of showing manaakitanga, or it's the convenience that is there at that time, then you just roll with it. And I never judge what people put on the table at a marae or at a hui. And my personal take on that for my own eating is, if I am going to offend somebody by not eating a carbohydrate, I will eat the carbohydrate. So if somebody has personally made me a cake, if rewana is my favorite bread, which it is, and there's a beautiful rewana at a hui, I am going to eat it and I'm going to enjoy it. And so this is not about never ever. And everyone will have their own personal whakaaro on that. For Marianne, she turned 60 this year, her whānau, 3 different birthday parties. They all baked her a beautiful cake. She ate a piece of each of those cakes, and she enjoyed it. For her, that surgery is more important than cake. And so the rest of the year, she isn't doing that. For me, most weeks I'm having something, okay? And that's because I don't have so much to lose or to gain. So everyone has their own way that they deal with that. But in saying that, so at my marae Rotako, we host kororeo every year, and we have now significantly reduced the carbohydrate. So bread isn't put on the table with dinner at every meal type thing. And one evening we made fathead pizza. So there are definitely low carb alternatives to bread, but they cost more because of the flours that are needed. So the almond meal and those types of things are more expensive. So our whānau did do fathead pizza for 120 guests, and you can do that, and it really depends who your ringawera are, and what your budget is. But at its heart, this doesn't have to be expensive, and I think that's why I use Joseph's story, is because he is a solo dad on a benefit, and he can make this work. And what makes it achievable for him is that he does eat one meal a day, and that he knows where to shop. He can buy the cuts of meat at the different butchers. He uses the vegetables that are in season. So this can be as cheap or as expensive as you can afford. And I accept that some of our whānau literally have $30 left at the end of the week for kai and other expenses. And for those whānau, we're not having this conversation, we're having a different conversation. But for those that are having kai every day, we are talking about what changes they can make. And kia ora te mere, rangi. So kia ora, Lily, do you have any suggestions on how we share the key messages of LCHF for Māori and Pacific communities that remain consistent with current Ministry of Health eating and activity guidelines? Is that possible? So kia ora to that whātai. It is something that AUT have definitely been lobbying for, to have this way of eating included in the national guidelines, the Ministry of Health guidelines. And at the moment, it's not really there. And so what I've had to do in my own mahi is I've had to make sure that I have really looked at the risks enough to be able to defend myself. And thankfully it hasn't come to that, but definitely overseas it has. And so Tim Noakes is a really famous example in South Africa where he went to trial over this. There's been a doctor in Sweden that's been to trial over this, and a doctor in Tasmania who has been to trial over this, and some dietitians have also been, and they've all won their cases. And so that to me is really heartening that particularly in Sweden they reviewed thousands of documents in regard to this for that doctor's trial, and they ruled that she was practicing evidence-based medicine. And so I'm hopeful, because in America, where despite their litigious society, they actually seem to have a bit more freedom around this. Their Diabetes Association has included low carb now in their treatment guidelines. It's a small paragraph, but it is a paragraph as an option for nutritional management. And so those guidelines are followed. It's a joint guideline between Europe and America. And so that happened last year, which I think is also works in our favour. And there has been a court order in the US that in the next review of the dietary guidelines that saturated fat and low carb needs to be specifically addressed, and the evidence needs to be reviewed before they write the next guidelines. So I'm hopeful that if America do it, that then the World Health Organization will do it, and then New Zealand will do it. I've done that one, so just Tanya. Is there an impact on performance for competitive sports people that eat that low carb, high fat diet? Yes. So when you make the transition from high carb to low carb, because a lot of athletes use glucose gels and things in their sport, there will be a temporary drop off in performance. And then it really depends what you're trying, what kind of sport you're in, as to whether this is going to be beneficial for you. So definitely for endurance sports, long distance running, strength, things like that, where you don't need this short sudden speed. So netball and rugby, those are all kind of more endurance type sports. Definitely this way of eating will in the long run mean that you have readily accessible fuel throughout without having to eat during the game or during the event. So definitely for marathon runners, there have been a cohort that have changed because they're not having the glucose gels, they're not getting the diarrhea, they're not hitting the wall, that they've used up all their glycogen stores because they are actually running on fat. And so they just have a continuous supply of fat and they don't hit the wall in that way. And there's definitely been examples of people that have bettered their previous scores that they used to have on high carb. But there are definitely some sports where, like a short sprint, you are going to benefit from having some glucose. And so there's ways of doing both, but I definitely recommend that you work with a dietitian and Grant Schofield definitely says that that's really only at that elite level that it matters. If you're not elite, it probably isn't important, but you need to kind of know what you're doing. Okay, so Debbie, so how many minutes? A couple of minutes, okay. So just for Debbie, kia ora. So the fats that I recommend people add and when they need it. So the fats that I recommend are the fat from your kai. So that is the fat on your meat, the skin on your chicken, the fat that comes from animals like dairy products, cheese, butter, cream, coconut oil, coconut cream, olive oil, and then the next one, and then eggs and nuts and things like that. Kylie, you mentioned two of Joseph's have autism. Has the low carb had any significant changes for them? Yes, and this is just subjective from my experience of them, that definitely the distress levels, because they're non-verbal, are much lower, and Joseph has found that they are calmer during the day when they eat this way. And, you know, if you watch documentaries like The Magic Pill, you know, there's definitely in there, it goes to clinics where this way of eating is used for children with autism and shows the benefits. So, all right, so I'll just about finished, I think. So what have we done? So we've got our Low Carb Healthy Whānau Facebook page. If you want to join, it's open to anybody in the community. I've set up a page called LCHF for health professionals. Oh, not healthy, but health. That's the first time I've noticed that. And on there, I've just put some interesting, you know, kind of lectures and papers over the years, but it's not largely used much otherwise. We have surveyed our whānau, so on the Facebook page, we put out a monkey survey, just looking at what the benefits have been from doing this, and we got over 100 responses. And so you can see that the reason that people started was really broad, and as the previous person mentioned, it's not just about weight. So it was around mental health, it was about feeling healthy, reducing tiredness, diabetes, lots of different reasons, polycystic ovaries. And the feedback that we've had about our Facebook page really is that it's a supportive place. We don't have too many rules around what people can talk about or how low carb they need to be, because we realise that everybody has their own. This is personal, and you can't judge people for where they are on their journey, because it's the right thing for them right now. And then the benefits, interestingly enough, at our low carb support group, we talk a lot about mental well-being, and that the mental clarity and the increased energy have meant that depression has gone away. And that's something that I wasn't really expecting when we started this. But some people that have been in a long-term depression, addicted to sugar, and they've managed to turn that around, and now they have really great energy, their mood is better, and their life, their well-being is so much improved. We've had a few babies, so it improves your fertility because polycystic ovaries is insulin resistance affecting the ovaries, and so we've definitely had some low carb babies, but also obviously in practice I see improvement in diabetes and blood pressure and things like that. So these are just some of the comments that we got from our survey, and so you can just kind of look through those, but you can see that this was just a handful of the comments that we got, and it was echoed over and over and over again. You know, the 100 or so people that replied, this was the theme that came out of it, the reasons that the benefits that they've seen, and so you can see there, particularly around mental well-being, energy, and the diabetes and relationship with food. So just a mihi again to Joseph and his whānau and to Marianne, that, you know, we do this for our whānau, and often that is the motivation for us, that, you know, we don't want to be dying younger, we don't want to be disabled while we're alive, and so the reason we do that is for our whānau. So from me and from everybody at Turuki Healthcare, kia ora for listening in, and I appreciate your questions, and feel free to join us on our Low Carb Healthy Whānau Facebook page.
Right. Tēnā koe, Lily, tuatahi tēnei ka mihi atu kia koe, mo te whai wā, ki te wānanga tahi, me ngā rōpū, kua tai mai nei, tā e mihi ana kia koe, te uri o kaitahu, o te rā te raukura o Honi Waititi, e mihi atu ana kia koe. So I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for attending the webinar today. The webinar will be accessible within the next week via the Toi Tangata website, and it'll also be uploaded online. So we would also look at the presentation that Lily has given, but possibly a variation of it, just in case some of the images are images that you don't want to be shared. But on top of that, I think he mihi tēnei no toi tangata ki a koe e hoa, o tira ki a koutou katoa. We'd just like to say thank you for joining our Toi Ako webinar series, and yep, there will be some more to come as the year rolls on. No reira, mihi atu ana kia koutou. Kia ora tātou katoa. If you've got any more information, you can contact Toi Tangata, and we'll share any mataranga that we have from this webinar with you. Kia ora rā.